podcast you're about to listen to is from a book series on post-qualitative, new materialist, and critical post-humanist research. I'm Karen Murris and chief editor of this new Routledge series. You can find it on the following website, www.postqualitativeresearch.com.
Chapter 6. Restless Remains and Untimely Returns, on Walking and Wading. My name is Adrienne van Eeden-Wharton, and I'm an artist researcher. This chapter draws on two projects, Saltwater Bodies from an Atlas of Loss, and Waterlog, an ongoing body of site-responsive creative practice and archival research. For years, I've been following multi-species death assemblages, the remains of beings brought together post-mortem, after death, from former sites of the so-called harvesting and processing of whales, seals, seabirds, and guano, to contemporary places of disposal. Waterlog grapples with multi-species past, present, futures in the enduring aftermaths of imperialism, capitalism, extractivism, and military-industrial expansion. It takes this work further south, from the mainland shores and islands along the southern African coast to the South Atlantic, Indian, and Southern Oceans, the subantarctic islands, and finally to the frozen ends of the earth, Antarctica. For example, as I map the former sites of 20th century shore-based whaling stations and the routes of pelagic factory ships and catchers, I explore the role of African seaports as gateways to the southern high-latitude regions, the sprawling networks of capital, control, and coerced labor that enabled the industrial-scale slaughter of migrating cetaceans, inseparable from European colonial occupation. Images and sounds recorded at crumbling remains introduce violent histories that connect seemingly disparate places and times, as well as questions of survivance. My practice has been shaped by years of walking and gathering along shores which bear witness to long, yet habitually under-acknowledged, indigenous histories of these very practices, in a country where mobility and access remain vastly unequal. Walk, a deceptively straightforward English word whose origins suggest anything but a straight line, unencumbered forward motion. It invites wayward, errant itineraries and detours, not rushing from one end to the other like the way one imagines books ought to be read. Rather, a slow and observant, piecemeal and iterative practice of re-walking and rereading, revisiting and researching. Beachcombing, an inefficient zigzagging along high water marks in rack zones, places of wreckage and remnants, and unlooked-for richness. Fossicking, picking over discarded remains, bits and pieces broken and scattered, carried by water and air from a multitude of elsewheres, an excess of things, neglected things, leftover things, lost things, cast off and disposed of things, last things, unlike things, and those that don't add up. Stories told in pieces, in parts, with small words like salt and water and bodies, spewed onto the shore in foamy outbursts, or swallowed up in breathless gasps, drowned. At times no more than a susurration, a low murmur, an ancient drawn-out guttural sigh, a faint grey echo, barely there. Stories that are out of place and out of time, displaced and untimely, drift out of reach, or, submerged, sink slowly, like long snowfall. Sedimented, silty stories churned up from the depths of forgotten seabeds, suspended, sometimes surfacing unexpectedly, briefly. Stories that wash away, wash up, or are left behind, are transported across oceans against their will, and those that end up there, accidentally, stranded. On the shore, illusions of certainty, fixity, and orderly, calculable time and space are wrecked, shattered by physical, chemical, geological, and atmospheric forces, changeable, ambivalent, undecided, unsteady, not seemly academic words, but fitting for the amplified exposure and felt intensity at the indeterminate edges of the sea. The unremitting negotiations and pulsating exchanges of the literal signal places of always unfinished business, of restless remains and untimely returns. Ingresses into a multitude of waterlogged stories and possibilities, inviting amphibious ways of learning and making, work that is digressive and faltering rather than articulate and authoritative, risks being drenched, engulfed, disoriented, undone. I learned to tarry, not only to delay, but to linger, to take my time, to stay until being here is enough, or my trembling body grows numb in the frigid waters, to hesitate as I stumble over boulders, lose my footing on algae-covered rocks, to hold back judgment like I would hold my breath underwater, gasping for air as I surface, my eyes stinging, burning from the salt water and vision blurry, flooded, as with tears, saturated, drenched, soaked. For our practice to become seaworthy, it too must become amphibious. Waterlogged footnotes, like earth that is ceaselessly washed by the sea as it makes and unmakes, cuts together apart. Living and dying, pasts, presents, and futures, smashing against each other during storm swells, surges, and flash floods, or wearily toing and froing, only just touching, seeping together at saltwatery edges, between liquid and solid, like melting sea ice. Seeping implies both contact and infiltration, a good word for unnoticed creeping devastation, attritional toxicities impossible to contain, trickles, leaks, spills. These are the unremarked colors of shadows and out-of-sight shadow places, of effluent and sludge, agricultural runoff, toxic industrial and cooling water discharge, contaminated municipal wastewater and sewage, smokestack plumes from refineries and chemical plants, heavy metal dust, ship exhaust gas emissions, bunkering and refueling oil, ballast water, and dredged sediments. But they are also the muddied tones of slow, messy work, the wakeful hues of mourning and falling in love with damaged, seep-stained ecologies.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you would like to know more about this chapter, please visit the website www.postqualitativeresearch.com. And please stay tuned for future podcasts.